Have you ever noticed that one day, without warning, what you were passionate about yesterday no longer awakens anything in you today? You look at your paintbrush, your guitar, your books, your games, and everything seems to have lost its flavor. You wonder what broke inside you, why what once defined you suddenly seems useless. Many think it's a loss, a kind of disturbing inner emptiness. But in reality, according to Jung, it's often the sign that something much deeper is starting to move. Your soul no longer refuses to feed on what no longer corresponds to it. Spiritual awakening is not only light and peace, it is also a dismantling, a falling of masks, a brutal questioning of everything you believed yourself to be. If your passions collapse, it is because your spirit is tearing you away from illusions to open you to a more authentic truth. What you are experiencing is not an end, but a transition to an existence more aligned with your true essence. And in this journey, what seems like a loss is in reality a necessary passage towards a greater freedom. Have you ever felt that strange emptiness, that moment when the things that made your heart beat suddenly become insignificant? You sit down at your guitar, but no melody comes out. You look at your brushes and colors, but the canvas no longer calls to you. The games, the travels, the projects that once stimulated you seem dull, as if they have lost their luster. In today's society, this phenomenon is often perceived as worrying, almost pathological. You are told that you are tired, that you lack motivation, that you are depressed. But what if the truth were greater than that? What if this loss of interest were not a disease of the soul, but rather a sign that your spirit is rising to another dimension of itself? Carl Jung, one of the most profound thinkers of the last century, understood a reality that few dare to face. Spiritual awakening is not a comfortable state of permanent ecstasy. It is a process of dismantling, a tearing away from the old structures that defined your life. And one of the first visible symptoms is precisely what you are going through: the sudden loss of interest in what yesterday seemed to be your reason for existing. This experience is unsettling because it shatters your sense of identity. You had an identity woven around your passions. Perhaps you saw yourself as the artist, the musician, the athlete, the intellectual. These roles gave you a sense of grounding. They gave you reasons to get up in the morning, to feel useful, valued, alive. But in the midst of awakening, those same senses begin to crack. Enthusiasm evaporates, and with it, the idea that your identity is tied to these activities. This isn't an arbitrary loss. It's a necessary step. The reason is simple. The soul does not feed on substitutes forever. As long as you believe your hobbies are yours, you are moving away from your essence. You think your value lies in what you accomplish, what you show, what you prove to others. But spiritual awakening is meant to shatter this illusion. It comes to tear off your masks, even if it hurts. So, what you perceive as a breakdown of desire is actually an awakening of your conscience. You are no longer interested in what fueled your ego, because your soul demands something else: the truth. Let's look at it another way. Have you truly lost your passions? Or have they ceased to serve their purpose as camouflage? Many people use their favorite activities as anesthetics. We paint to avoid feeling lonely. We immerse ourselves in games to escape anxiety. We collect, we travel, we go out, we laugh, to avoid facing the inner emptiness. These activities, however noble they may seem, are sometimes nothing more than sophisticated escapes. And when awakening occurs, these escapes lose their power. It's as if a part of you now refuses to continue falling asleep. This moment can be brutal. You feel as if your energy is being extinguished. You wonder if something inside you is broken. But nothing is broken. Quite the opposite. It's a sign that you're repairing yourself. What's dying isn't your creativity, nor your vitality. What's dying are the artificial attachments that held you back from yourself. And that's why Jung said that awakening feels like a symbolic death. The death of the old psychic order, to make way for something deeper. Understand this. The loss of interest is not a regression. It is a step forward. But like any step forward, it is uncomfortable. The ego screams because it is losing its toys, its proofs, its distractions. You, as a deeper being, feel a form of disorientation because the old world of meanings is collapsing. Yet, if you observe carefully, it is not nothingness. It is a transition. You have not yet found what will replace these passions, and that is normal. The soul always creates an empty space before filling it with what is true. Many people panic at this stage. They try to artificially rekindle their old desires. They try to recapture the enthusiasm they once had, like blowing on a dying ember. But that fire won't reignite, because what was burning wasn't your inner flame, but borrowed energy, fueled by external validation, by the need for recognition, by escape from reality. When that disappears, it's a liberation. And even if you feel lost, it's precisely because you're breaking free from the cage you grew up in. So, instead of judging yourself, observe. Observe what this loss shows you. It shines a light on your old motivations. It reveals the places where you were attached to illusions. It confronts you with the silence you've always tried to avoid. This silence is not an enemy. It is the fertile soil from which a new authenticity will emerge. But for that to happen, you must accept that the old world is fading. This is why Jung asserted that awakening is not all light and love. It is also dismantling, disorientation, a dark night. But in that darkness, there is a promise. The promise that what is born next will be truer, more solid, and more nourishing than anything you have ever known before. Before awakening, we must understand that most of the activities we are passionate about are not neutral. They are not just entertainment or means of expression. They are extensions of the ego, subtle instruments that reinforce the image we have of ourselves. Jung called this the persona, the social mask. This mask is not necessarily negative. It plays a useful role in our adaptation to the outside world, but it becomes a prison when we confuse this mask with our true identity. Let's take a concrete example. Someone who identifies as the musician. He doesn't play just for the pleasure of the sound. His practice becomes a way of being recognized as talented, different, creative. Each note is no more than a vibration. It becomes proof addressed to the outside world. And through this proof, the ego is nourished. Another, who defines himself as the athlete, lives his sport not only for the health of the body, but above all for the adrenaline of victory, for the image of a strong and disciplined spirit. Even the painter, even the intellectual immersed in his reading, can sometimes be driven by a hidden motive, that of proving their worth. This mechanism is universal. From childhood, we learn that to be loved, we must do. Make people laugh, make an effort, perform. Unconditional love is replaced by a love conditioned by results, and the child internalizes this logic. If I succeed, I deserve it. As an adult, this logic is expressed in hobbies. Playing the guitar becomes an identity. Reading hundreds of books becomes an identity. Traveling, cooking, collecting. All of this takes on symbols that go far beyond the activity itself. But here's the problem. As long as you define yourself by your hobbies, you remain trapped in the external dimension. You believe your worth lies in what you show the world. The ego loves this because it thrives on comparisons, validation, and proof. But the soul doesn't see it. The soul doesn't measure its greatness by the number of victories it wins, the number of paintings it paints, or the number of miles it travels. It seeks an authenticity that none of these can give it. This is where awakening comes in. For awakening, at its core, is a confrontation with everything that wasn't you. Imagine this moment as a harsh light shining into your inner room. Everything that was decor, everything that was facade, becomes visible for what it is, a construct. And in this light, your hobbies, so dear to your heart, suddenly appear as strategies, mechanisms, masks. It's a shock, because for years, you sincerely believed that these passions defined you. You said, "I'm a writer, I'm a gamer, I'm a traveler," but that wasn't you. That was your ego in disguise. That was your mask in action. It's essential to understand that the ego is not an enemy. It's a tool. But when the mask takes over, it stifles the true self. So, when you lose interest in your hobbies, it's not that you're losing your essence. On the contrary, it's that your essence is beginning to breathe, and it's rejecting what was only a role. Jung explained that ego-related hobbies give a sense of fulfillment while consciousness is asleep. But the moment consciousness expands, that sense collapses, because your inner self doesn't need to prove anything. It doesn't need to be seen as the artist or the athlete. These titles only have value in social theater, not in inner truth. And this explains why, after an awakening, so many activities seem bland. It's not that you've lost your will to live. It's that you no longer need those roles to feel like you exist. You discover that your existence is sufficient in itself, that you don't have to earn the air you breathe, that life, in its essence, doesn't ask you to play a role, but simply to be. This is why detachment occurs. And the more it occurs, the more you realize how conditioned your old motivations were. You wanted to succeed, to impress, to prove yourself, to belong. But when the ego dissolves, it all seems hollow. What once stimulated you suddenly becomes artificial, like a theater set you look at after the show is over, beautiful from a distance, but devoid of real life. This realization is painful because it touches your foundations. You're not just losing a hobby, you're losing a piece of the identity you thought was you. But it's an illusion that's falling away. What you're losing was never really you. What you're losing is the mask. And if you accept this stripping away, another dimension can emerge, that of naked authenticity. Modern human beings are so accustomed to defining themselves by their activities that they feel lost without them. We say, "I am a doctor, I am a painter, I am a runner." But who are you when all these labels disappear? This is the question that awakening imposes, and the answer is not intellectual. It is not found in a new hobby, nor in a new performance. It is found in silence, in the discovery that you are already complete, even without a role. This is why awakening tears away your ego-bound passions, because it wants to bring you back to what you are beyond any definition, because it wants to teach you that you have nothing to prove, because it wants you to be free. Imagine one morning when you wake up with a strange feeling. The sun enters your room, life goes on around you, but something has changed. You look at the familiar objects around you, your guitar lying in a corner, the books on your table, the tools that yesterday represented your passions. Nothing moves within you, no spark. as if everything has lost its weight, its taste, its ability to awaken your enthusiasm. And in this inner silence, a thought slips in. What's wrong with me? This feeling is one of the most disconcerting of spiritual awakening. Until now, your hobbies gave you direction, meaning. They were your refuges, your playgrounds, your escapes. You knew what to do when you felt alone or worried. You immersed yourself in these activities. They added color to your days. But today, nothing works anymore. The setting is still there, but the magic has faded. It's as if you were watching a movie whose ending you already know. Nothing surprises anymore. Nothing nourishes. Jung would have described this moment as a crucial step, the dissolution of the mask. Everything that yesterday supported your ego, everything that reinforced your character, suddenly disappears. And what remains is a void. This void is not a mistake. It is a space. But when you are immersed in it, it feels like an immense loss. You feel as if you have lost a part of yourself, as if your vitality has flown away with your passions. You have to understand that human beings hate emptiness. Our minds are always looking to fill it. That's why, in the first moments, many try to force the return of old pleasures. They say to themselves, if I start playing again, maybe the flame will come back. If I travel again, maybe I'll find enthusiasm again. But the experience is bitter. The more you try to rekindle the old fire, the colder it seems. Because the fire that burned was not that of your soul, but that of a constructed identity. And once that identity cracks, no amount of willpower can keep it standing. This is where disorientation sets in. You no longer have any bearings. You no longer know what defines you or what attracts you. You ask yourself, if I am no longer the artist, the player, the athlete, who am I? This questioning is dizzying. It gives you the impression of being suspended between two worlds, the old one, which is collapsing, and the new one, which has not yet emerged. And in this in-between, everything seems pointless. Even conversations seem empty. Even simple pleasures no longer bring the same warmth. Many people at this stage speak of feelings akin to depression, but it's important to distinguish. Depression is a directionless collapse, a blockage that deprives you of movement. The emptiness of awakening is a transition. It's like a scorched field. Everything seems dead on the surface, but beneath the ground, something new is brewing. You can't see it yet, and that's precisely what makes this stage so uncomfortable. You're invited to remain in silence, in not knowing, in this sense of absence, unable to cling to your old bearings. This stage is so troubling because hobbies weren't just activities, they were your mirror. They told you who you were. They gave you a role in society, a sense of belonging. When they disappear, you no longer have that mirror. You have to face yourself, naked, without a set, without a stage. And it's this nudity that frightens, because it confronts a truth that many spend their lives avoiding. Beneath the roles, who am I really? This emptiness acts as a revealer. It prevents you from taking refuge in distractions. It forces you to see the silence, to feel the solitude, to encounter parts of yourself that you had left in the shadows. This is why Jung spoke of a process of death and rebirth. The death of old structures, followed by the emergence of a more authentic life. But this rebirth does not happen immediately. In between, there is this crossing of the desert. In this desert, everything seems pointless. You can look at a beautiful painting and see only a jumble of colors. You can listen to a song and hear only mechanical noise. You can spend time with friends and feel alienated from the conversation. It's not that life has lost its meaning. It's that your old system of meaning has collapsed and the new one isn't yet in place. You're in suspense, and this suspense is unbearable for the ego, but it's indispensable for the soul. There is something profoundly sacred in this emptiness, even if it seems unbearable. It is a space of gestation, like the night before dawn, like the seed that disappears underground before germinating. This inner silence prepares something greater. But for this to emerge, one must accept the absence, the loss, the disorientation, without seeking to escape, without seeking to glue back on the old mask. It's a challenge few understand. Those around you often only see disinterest and fatigue. They tell you, you should pull yourself together, find your passions again, force yourself. But none of this works, because it's not a question of willpower. It's an inner transformation, a spiritual shift, and no one, not even you, can control its pace. All you can do is stay present in the space that opens up. That's why this emptiness is so powerful. It shatters the illusion that you could control everything. It forces you to let go, to face the absence, to discover that even without passions, without identities, without masks, you still exist. And it is there, in this stripping away, that the true path to yourself begins. There's a profound reason why your passions fade after awakening. It's not just because the ego loses its toys, but because something even more intimate is revealed. Your shadow. Jung called it everything we repress, everything we don't want to see in ourselves, everything that disrupts the image we want to present to the world. It's a part of you, but an exiled part, left in the darkness of your unconscious. And as long as you lived in your hobbies, it was easy not to look at it. Because let's be honest, how many activities served not only to delight you, but to distract you? You played to avoid feeling anxiety. You went out to avoid facing loneliness. You created to avoid hearing the inner silence. Every passion, however beautiful on the surface, could function as a barrier between you and your shadow. An elegant anesthesia, but an anesthesia nonetheless. When awakening occurs, this mechanism falls away, as if your soul were saying to you, enough band-aids, enough running away. It's time to see what lies beneath. Then suddenly, passions no longer fulfill. They no longer function as refugees. They reveal the pain, fear, loneliness, and insecurity that you had carefully enveloped, and you find yourself naked before this truth. In reality, you had sometimes painted, traveled, sung, and worked not to live fully, but to flee what you had been carrying in silence. This is where what mystics call the dark night of the soul begins, a journey where nothing makes sense, where everything fades away, where you can no longer hide behind your masks. Many describe this period as unbearable. It feels like losing yourself, sinking into despair. But the truth is, this dark night isn't a punishment. It's a process of purification. It burns away illusions, one by one. It tears away what wasn't true. And yes, it feels like a death, because the old you is dying. Look closely at what emerges when your passions collapse. Often, these are feelings you've pushed away your whole life. A fear of not being enough, a pain of being rejected, a loneliness never acknowledged, a shame you've always carried. These are invisible scars, forming your shadow, and as long as you were busy, you didn't have to see them. But in the void of awakening, there is no escape. You are forced to stay with them. It's brutal because we've been conditioned to believe that our wounds are weaknesses. But Jung said the opposite. The shadow isn't a flaw. It's a part of your humanity. It contains your unlived energy, your repressed emotions, your forbidden desires, your suppressed fears. As long as you ignore them, they rule you in the shadows. But when you face them, they become a source of power and healing. The problem is that this face-to-face encounter isn't pleasant. You may feel overwhelmed by immense sadness or by anger you didn't realize was there. You may feel a void so deep it feels like an abyss. And that's when many panic. They say to themselves, "I don't want to see this." And they try to return to their old distractions. But once the awakening begins, there's no going back. The mask no longer fits. The illusion is shattered. This step is a true initiation. It asks you to remain in the night without seeking immediate light. It teaches you that solitude is not a condemnation, but an encounter. That fear is not a curse, but a signal. That pain is not an enemy, but a teacher. And it is only when you agree to sit with these inner presences that the transformation truly begins. Spiritual traditions have always spoken of this passage. Christian mystics spoke of the dark night of the soul. The alchemists, whom Jung studied extensively, spoke of the nigredo, the blackening, that phase where all that is false must be dissolved before the inner gold can appear. In all cultures, this moment is described as a symbolic death, because it's not about destroying who you are, but about destroying what you are not. And this is precisely where the value of this emptiness lies. It deprives you of your escape routes so that you can, at last, see your shadow. For in truth, you were never just the musician, the player, the artist, the athlete. You were also that hidden loneliness, that unspoken pain, that silent fear, and as long as you refuse to look at them, they rule your life from the unconscious. Awakening breaks this cycle. What you feel as a loss is therefore an opening towards a more complete you. Because meeting your shadow is meeting the other half of your being. It is understanding that you are not only light and strength, but also fragility and wounds. And this is not a shame. It is a truth that once accepted makes you more whole than ever. So when you're going through that dark night, remember, you're not falling apart. You're meeting yourself. You're not dying. You're being born. When the old world crumbles, when the passions that seemed indestructible evaporate, when nothing excites you anymore, it's easy to believe that everything is over. You may say to yourself, "I'll never find the joy I once had." But the truth is, what you think is an end is actually a beginning. Because after the dark night, there always comes a dawn. And this dawn has nothing to do with the old fires of the ego. It opens onto something truer, purer, more lasting, passions born of the soul. How do you distinguish these new passions from the old ones? The difference is subtle, but essential. Before, you did things to prove yourself. Now you do things to be yourself. Before, you sought external validation. Now you find an inner resonance. Before, your energy came from the fear of not being enough. Now it comes from a spontaneous impulse that doesn't seek to justify its existence. It is this shift that Jung called the path to individuation, the process by which a being ceases to be a conditioned copy and becomes itself, whole, unique, indivisible. This rebirth doesn't happen overnight. Often, it begins with tiny impulses. You find yourself walking in nature and feeling, for the first time, that each step is a meditation. You write a few lines in a journal, not trying to impress anyone, but simply to put into words what your soul whispers. You pick up an instrument, and instead of playing to demonstrate a talent, you let the sounds flow like breathing. These gestures seem simple, but there's nothing banal about them. They mark the return of a creativity that no longer needs a mask. And sometimes these new passions are nothing like your old ones. Where you were obsessed with competition, you may discover the pleasure of silence. Where you sought recognition in art, you may find unexpected peace in gardening, walking, contemplation. These are not escapes, but natural expressions of your being. They seek nothing. They prove nothing. They are. And in this being, you touch a freedom that no performance has ever given you. What's fascinating is that many people rediscover their old hobbies, but in a completely different form. The artist who painted to be recognized ends up painting again, but as a silent prayer. The musician takes up his instrument again, not to conquer a stage, but to express the inexpressible. Even the athlete can rediscover the joy of movement, not to win, but to feel the energy of life flowing through his body. It's not passion that returns, it's intention that changes, and this intention makes all the difference. You see, the loss of your old passions wasn't a curse, but a preparation. It cleared the space. It burned away what was false so that what was true could emerge. It tore you away from your illusions so you could create from another place, that of your essence. And that place never runs out of inspiration. Because the soul is infinite, and its deepest desire is not to prove, but to express itself. Creativity born of the soul knows no bounds of comparison. It does not depend on applause. It does not seek to produce a measurable result. It is a natural movement, like water flowing, like a tree growing. And the more you surrender to it, the more you discover a joy that cannot be taken away. A joy that exists even if no one sees it, even if it is not validated by any outside gaze. This is true freedom, no longer being a prisoner of what you do to be recognized, but letting what you do become an extension of who you are. And this freedom transforms not only your passions, but your entire life. Because once you no longer need to prove anything, you finally begin to live. There's a profound irony in this process. What you were afraid of losing was actually what was keeping you from finding yourself. You believed that without your hobbies, you would be empty. But it was this emptiness that opened the door to your essence. You believed that your identity depended on your passions, but it was in losing them that you discovered that your identity depends on nothing. And it is in this nakedness that your true passions are reborn. So when that moment arrives, don't try to understand with your mind. Observe with your heart. Feel the difference between an activity that feeds your ego and one that feeds your soul. You'll easily recognize it. One exhausts you, the other elevates you. One pushes you to seek results, the other immerses you in the moment. One binds you to the fear of failure, the other opens you to the gratitude of simply being. This is why losing your old hobbies is a sacred passage, because what you lose was never you, and what comes after, even if it takes time, is the true expression of your being. If today you are going through this stage where your old hobbies no longer speak to you, know that you are not dying. You are being reborn. The emptiness you feel is fertile ground, ready to welcome passions that will no longer be dictated by the ego, but by your soul. Do not try to force what is dead to live again. Leave room for silence, experiment, observe, and trust the process. And now I'd like to ask you a question. What hobby, what passion have you lost since your awakening? And how has this changed your inner life? Share it in the comments, as your experience may resonate with someone else's. If you want to delve deeper into this exploration of Jungian psychology, shadow work, and the spiritual path, subscribe. Together, let's continue to explore what most don't dare to look at, the depths of the human soul.